Good evening, everyone. Let me just read my thing real fast. For ordinance number 79, I, in consultation with the city manager and city attorney, determined that meeting in person would not be prudent for some or all persons due to a public health emergency or other unforeseen circumstances affecting the city. So, hi everyone. I first just want to welcome Ken. Ken, thank you so much for filling Kristen's vacancy. We're happy to have you here and look forward to the conversation. And then we'll call the meeting to order. And first is the approval of the December minutes.
I move that we approve the December 10th, 2020 minutes.
And do we have a
Ken, do
second?
I have a second?
I guess, Carrie, point of clarification, do we want Ken to second, or how do we want to handle this? Can you help us out?
Normally, it would probably work to say, does anybody object? We have unanimous consent. But since our requirement for remote meetings says that we do a roll call vote, you probably need to get a second. And
The chair can second if Ken doesn't feel comfortable since he wasn't there.
Yep.
I mean,
Okay.
Ken, I don't mind seconding it if anybody doesn't have objection, even though I wasn't there. I read them, so I second.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ken. And then can we do roll call?
Yes. Mayor Pro Tem Kniff,
Yes.
Councilmember Gorgel,
Yes.
Councilmember Summers.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And I will turn it over to Lindsay for our agenda review.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. So tonight we're going to spend our first agenda item just with some time for committee members for a little bit of reflection. I have 3 slides just to reorient everyone to where we've been. And then we'll have a brief discussion about the use of the chat function, which came up after the last meeting. And then we have 2 deeper dive topics for you tonight. We're going to explore innovative partnerships with Steph Franchi and Joe Rowan tonight. We're very excited to have them, and Clay Fricke is going to facilitate that panel. And then our latter part of our meeting is going to be doing a deeper dive into the strategies and initial priorities with the Housing Strategic Plan that Molly Fitzpatrick from Root Policy Research, our consultant, will help lead us through. And then as always, we'll close up our meeting with a process check-in and future meetings and priority topics. And so if it works for you, Councilmember Gorgel, I'll just kick off those first few slides to orient us.
Sounds great. Thank you, Lindsay.
As always, we start off with where are we at in the plan process? And so I'll start off with some good news tonight. The draft plan has just been put online as of last night. And for anybody who's watching and is interested, that's available at fcgov.com/housing. We have an 8-step process that we've been walking through for this, and we now are in step 6, where we're prioritizing the strategies prior to plan adoption, in which first reading will be on February 16th. As you all know, and we had a chance to discuss in an onboarding meeting with Councilmember Summers and Darren and I last Friday, that this committee initially identified over 40 topics that they might consider to walk through, and prioritized 14 of them at the August meeting last year. And you can also see the topics on the left that the committee has discussed each time. On the right-hand side, all of the topics that are italicized are ones that this committee has discussed already. And the one in bold is the one we'll focus on tonight around innovative partnerships. What we also heard from the committee, we had a very intentional conversation at the meeting in August around what does success look like for this committee. And a couple of the themes that came up were around plan and do at the same time. And when a quicker win is identified, to send that forward to the full council for consideration. We don't need to wait until the full plan is done. We wanted to hear from community members and peer cities as we're considering strategies, being really clear on the problem that we're trying to solve. And then really one of the other things we've heard, especially after we dove in, is that you all wanted to spend the majority of your time in dialogue. And so having the pre-work and minimal presentations in order to get up to speed. And then finally, we'll have an end of term report that we'll be able to review in March and April. And just as one final slide before we touch on the chat function, these are the quicker wins that the committee has identified already. 3 of those do not yet require any specific council action. And that's looking at ways that we can address increasing affordable housing incentives in the land use code, assessing displacement risk, which is a mapping exercise that's underway, and then the work that was initiated through CARES funding in 2020 to work on a legal defense fund and work on eviction prevention. And then the ones that do require council action, the Metro DPA program, that stands for Down Payment Assistance, is on your consent agenda scheduled for February 2nd. This program, which you discussed in depth last time, expands the offerings that we have around down payment assistance at no cost to the city up to households earning $150,000 a year. And then the second one is scheduled for first reading on February 16th. And that's moving forward the off-cycle appropriation to advance the land use code work, which was a high priority strategy identified in city plan and continued to be a high priority strategy that we'll cover in more depth later tonight when we talk about the full suite of strategies. And so my final slide is around the chat function, and I'm happy to walk through these really quickly and then turn it over to you all for discussion. So if you all recall, at the last meeting, there was quite active use of the chat and question and answer function. And a question was raised as to what this committee wanted to do with the chat and Q&A function moving forward. And so there's some options that staff has identified is to keep the chat and the Q&A enabled, and we can revisit it if it continues to present a challenge. We could only enable the question and answer as a way to at least consolidate feedback, or you could disable the Q&A in the chat and consider a public comment period at the beginning of the meeting, or other options that of course you all might identify. And some considerations that when Councilmember Gorgel and I and others had a chance to do an agenda prep meeting was just recognizing that all chat and Q&A will be part of the record, and that was in the minutes that you saw tonight. There is a balance and attention between hearing community members and being able to stay focused in the work. And then we can always provide consistent messaging at the front if you keep either of the chat or Q&A feature, so that folks know that that's going to be a part of the record as well, and other things that we can message. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you all for discussion.
Yeah, Ross?
Yeah, thanks, Emily, and thanks, Lindsay. So I think we do need to have a way for the public to be able to give us feedback. I know they can email us, but I'd like it to be more structured than what we had that last time, because that was really impossible in real time for us committee members to follow. You could catch something and then miss it. And I think rather than wait for it to be a problem again, maybe we should just address it proactively and have a public comment meeting at the beginning of each session, which we've done with other council subcommittees in the past. So a structured way that lets community members participate, but that doesn't overwhelm the meeting. Because although this is a public meeting, this is not really intended to be a meeting with the public, if you understand the distinction. So that would be my preference, at least.
And so Ross, you're saying to have a public comment period at the beginning?
At the beginning, yeah, that'd be a good way to structure it and give people an opportunity to express their concerns and petition their government and everything else. But also let us be able to conduct our business deliberately when that comes around.
Mm-hmm. Ken, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I like Ross's recommendations. I think they would be best, as as he mentioned, there's a difference between having a public or community meeting and having a meeting in public. And so it probably would be more, efficient to have, public comment period if the public tends to, want to chime in on items or give us feedback, and then let us kind of get to the discussion of the agenda items.
Yeah, I think I would be okay with trying public comment. It could get quite lengthy and take up a lot of time, which is nice of the chat. But we could try it. We haven't had a ton of participation except for last time. I would like to leave the Q&A open, because as we go through and learning, I think community members also have questions, and that's also been helpful. So you know, I think we could leave the Q&A and if people have questions or follow-up, we could also have that. Yeah, Ross.
And that makes sense, although I think we should temper that expectation with a statement at the beginning that suggests that we might not get to all the Q&A during the meeting, but that some of them may be followed up offline.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, Lindsay, is that enough for you?
It is, yep. We heard
Okay.
that we will leave the Q&A open, providing consistent messaging up front, and then also adding a public comment.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, and let me just restart sharing my screen. We're trying to let you all see each other whenever possible. All right, we're going to turn it over for our first discussion item tonight. As I mentioned earlier, this was one of the topics that you all prioritize, and we are excited to have folks from our community that work with peer communities to help us think through how we might approach some innovative partnerships as we move toward implementation, especially. And so with that, I will turn it over to Clay Fricke to facilitate our panel.
Great, thanks, Lindsay, and thanks for the introduction. So good evening, members of the ad hoc committee. Clay Fricke with the Economic Health Office. The item up for your discussion this evening is a quick panel that we put together to talk about innovative partnerships that connects with the greatest challenge number 3 is found in the current draft of the Housing Strategic Plan, that the city does have some tools to encourage affordable housing, but the current amount of funding and incentives for affordable housing are not enough to meet our goals. And so last month, there was a few of us, Lindsay Subeck-Furcus, who's in our social sustainability department, and I got together to brainstorm who would be great to have on this panel and what questions would we want to ask them to have a robust discussion about this particular topic. And so we reached out to Steph Gafanci of Elevation Community Land Trust, geez, too many elevations. And then Joe Rowan from Impact Development Fund to come talk to us about some innovative and creative partnerships they've been involved in to discuss that with the ad hoc committee. And we had them put together quick presentations, about 5 minutes apiece, to answer the following questions. What have been successful projects that have been driven by multiple partnerships? And then what is a partnership you can envision that would have the biggest impact? And what's standing in the way of something like this here? And so with that as a backdrop, we'll turn it over to Steph Gafanci from Elevation Community Land Trust to start us off. And then we'll pass it off to Joe Rowan from Impact Development Fund for his presentation, then open it up for discussion from the ad hoc committee. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Clay. I am, oh, look, you already have my stuff in there. It's really helpful. So as Clay said, I'm with Elevation Community Land Trust, and it's funny because Elevation Credit Union is actually one of our lending partners. So we actually have that happen quite a lot. But so Elevation Community Land Trust, I think that most of you are familiar with us and our work and our recent work in Fort Collins and upcoming work really in Fort Collins. And when Clay asked that question, I said, you know, I have the perfect one. Anytime anyone asks, what's the greatest partnership that has really happened? It is actually the first project that we will be doing in Fort Collins. So really great alignment here with both this audience and with the question itself. So we are working throughout the state to create at least 1,000 community land trust homes and to really both create deep impact in wealth creation among low-income communities, and also the creation of the sustainable new platform that's across the state that will be able to steward these units over time, because we're really talking about permanent affordability. And so we need to be around when that lease comes up in 99 years and throughout the time when each of these homes is sold, to ensure that we always are selling to another qualified family, and that we are working alongside municipalities to make sure that we are serving the segments of the community that are your priority. So that is, and our mission is really to create opportunity through affordable home ownership, the greatest of which I believe is the ability to build intergenerational wealth. So not just the ability to build wealth through your asset, which is your home, but to be able to pass that on throughout generations and then really get to the equity issues that affordable homeownership truly addresses. So the project to which I'm referring is a partnership with Housing Catalyst, with the city of Fort Collins, and with CHFA, the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. And you are most likely familiar with the fact that Housing Catalyst has been looking to get rid of their public housing portfolio in order to really leverage those dollars and throw that capital back into the development of new units. When we first met with the city of Fort Collins, that had already been well underway. Several of those have been sold, mostly on the market, so that they could build these really high quality units that were more efficient in that they're not scattered throughout the city and have maintenance issues associated with the geography of that. And so as we kind of came into that, and Sue Beck-Firkus actually let us know of this, we said, boy, this could be an opportunity to both, not lose these units to the market, to meet Catalyst's goals of being able to realize that capital and build these new units, and also to meet some city goals as far as developing new opportunities for affordable homeownership. And really that convening of these organizations is what made this happen. So what at one point was 70 public housing units was now there was left a portfolio of 44 units. And so working with the city, or with Housing Catalyst, we came to a number that really worked so that they were able to meet their goals, but it was discounted enough that we were able to purchase them and put our capital in to renovate these up to a home ownership standard, and to be able to then sell them to folks that are under 80% of the area median income, and ensure that they are always part of that public infrastructure of affordable housing, so that every time they're sold, they are sold to someone under 80% of the area median income. From Housing Catalyst's perspective, their original 70 public housing units, they have already put together 49 new units, 68 preserved units, 70 new vouchers, and now 44 new home ownership opportunities. You go to the next slide. Kind of looks at all the partners in this project. And so the first partner outside of Housing Catalyst is the public housing residents themselves. So they did a great job of working with them to really communicate what was happening, how this was going on, and make sure that they were able to transition into their new residence, whether that was a new voucher situation, a move out of the area, or what we were really hoping for, which has not happened to date, but still could be, is the opportunity to stay in their home or to reach home ownership in one of our other opportunities here in Fort Collins. So the first folks that we always work with are the tenants that are in place to see if they have an interest in and a capacity for home ownership. And that would be the ultimate success, to be able to keep folks in place, but to move them into ownership, to be able to start building equity and really have that stability and opportunity that comes along with home ownership. You go back, thank you. So as I said earlier, the city of Fort Collins was really the connector here. We also worked really closely with the city to find other forms of subsidy that might be needed here. So as we were in the negotiations, we also knew, hey, we're really going to need to work on the energy efficiency of these homes. We're going to really need to perhaps find an additional subsidy that is beyond what we're putting in order to get these up to the place where they really are suitable for home ownership. And so there's been a lot of work with the city, not just not just an introduction, but really holding our hand through this and walking through the various scenarios. And one of the outcomes of that is that Housing Catalyst was able to put in reserves that they had for these homes to do some of the initial rehab in the project before we even acquire the units. And so all new roofs, for example, it's a lot of big kind of capital investments that could be done. Otherwise, they would have really lost those reserves because of federal regulations. So through all these conversations, we were able to get to a place that all of the numbers are going to work together. And the primary reason the numbers all work together is because of CHFA. So we worked with CHFA to develop a product that had previously not existed. Because really what we needed to be able to do is to purchase these homes and to keep folks in place so we weren't displacing anyone. And also to, we don't have the capacity to renovate 44 units at once. And the market doesn't really want to take on 44 for sale units at the same time either. So how are we going to phase this over time to acquire at a slower pace, but also to renovate at a pace that works and to sell at a pace that works? For that, we turned to CHFA, and they developed this product for us, which is a very low 2% interest rate, and gives us 5 years to get this project done so that we can meet the needs of the renters, of the rehabilitation of the units, and of the sale to the market, and really develop these owners beforehand by working with Neighbor to Neighbor, by working with even Habitat for Humanity and other Fort Collins organizations to ensure folks are trained and that they're receiving the proper homeownership education to get into the units. Go to the next one. This is just a quick overview of the funds that went into this project. So we've got $8.8 million in financing coming from CHFA. Elevation will be putting in over $1.5 million in subsidy, which is coming from philanthropic sources, and we'll be leaving those funds in to attain that permanent affordability. Homeowners will be purchasing the units using their mortgage financing at over $15.5 million, and about $100,000 in those public housing reserves are coming into play as well from Housing Catalyst. What's not factored in here is that our arrangement with Housing Catalyst, we are really purchasing these units as a portfolio, and therefore have they've given us essentially a discount for that, that allows us to make this happen and allows them to still get enough capital in order to meet their goals. So that is the quick and dirty overview of what is an amazing partnership that we are waiting for HUD's blessing to begin, but all the pieces are in place. We're excited to get started on it. The second question that I've been asked to address is sort of in the ideal partnership. And honestly, this really is the ideal partnership. There's not really a piece that's really missing here, except the one thing that I mentioned briefly, which is the energy efficiency piece. I think it would be really great if we had the resources from an additional partner to really come in and bring, make these a lot more sustainable, both from the homeowner's perspective of having really low energy bills, but also from an environmental perspective. That would be the only piece I would say was missing. Any questions?
Yeah, and speaking of that, I mean, I thought that's what some of the Bloomberg grant dollars were for, as far as energy efficiency of homes like that. Is that not the case? Can anybody, Lindsay, I don't know if that's a question for you or Darren or somebody.
Yeah, I mean, I welcome anyone to weigh in. What we've seen that, if I understand the elements correctly, and I certainly welcome anybody else to jump in, That's more for folks that are already in their homes. And so it's very similar to like our rebate programs. And so I think what Stefka is speaking to, I'm thinking about a couple other programs that we have at the city, and Stefka, I can certainly follow up with you offline. I'm thinking about our integrated design assistance program, which is traditionally more for commercial though. And so let me just think a little bit more and we can connect with our.
Those are maybe for more home now. So, and help me, because I'm not as familiar with like, so is the stock of these homes that are being are those all like Housing Catalyst owned houses? Is that the idea?
These homes in this project are currently all Housing Catalyst owned. They're a mixture of single family, there's duplexes, there's some tri and fourplexes, and then there are a few townhomes.
So the bottom line is you're going into these current stock, trying to upgrade them enough to be market worthy, so to speak, and then seeing if they could be sold to that 80% or less AMI, and there's about like 44, you say, potentially. Hey, on the 1,000 community land trust homes, is that here in Fort? I mean, is that Fort Collins or what's that?
That's statewide. And where we're going to stop. That is sort of the point at which we reach self-sufficiency, meaning that we won't have to be looking for grant dollars to run our organization, right? So we're self-sufficient and will continue to be around. All of our overhead is covered through the properties that we own when it gets to that, or the land that we own when it gets to that 1,000 units.
Okay. You know, I know that the community land trust, I think it's a good idea. I like that concept. And I know it's pretty new, so it hasn't been fully implemented enough to see all the maybe unintended consequences, but what's the, you know, is the idea of being able to build homeowner equity based on the fact that just will take more time than usual for a house to build enough equity to still be resold at that 80% or lower AMI, or are we anticipating people would have some increases in income, or that just inflationary increases in income? I'm trying to get a handle on, I want to make sure that people don't find themselves in as like, you know, the faster I go, the behinder I get, you know, type thing, because you're constantly trying to keep up with, you know, escalating home prices and inflation and everything else. So are there cases where this has been, where there's been any kind of, you know, I don't know, outcome measurements in terms of, you know, people's experience?
Yes. So a couple things. First, our resale formula is part of our land lease. So the land lease is really what ties that land together with the improvements. So you're able to buy that home for a much discounted price because you're only buying the improvements and not the land, right?
Okay.
That land lease, there is a shared equity formula. And what that really does is it says when you sell your home, you may price your home up to, so it kind of creates that maximum sales price that makes it so that you're getting 25% of the equity, of the appreciation, really. So you're getting 25%. So the appreciation when the time you bought it, and then the time you sell it, we look at an appraisal. So we look at that appraised value. And if it went up $100,000, then you can tack $25,000 onto your original sales price. So that's how it is determined. It is market-based, but it is limited, right? So it's a shared equity formula. I do want to clarify that although we are a new organization, community land trusts have been around since the late 60s, and there are all kinds of metrics that are out there, both about the community land trust model and about shared equity home ownership. And there's, you know, statistics showing how families are able to continue to build equity. It's not at the same rate as the market, However, that's sort of the trade-off between being able to get into home ownership at all. And also, it's got a public subsidy in it. And so because it's a public subsidy, we want to make sure that we retain that subsidy over time. So as, we are limiting the equity they're taking out, we are also ensuring that that next sales price is affordable to families below 80% of the area median income at that next sale and the one after that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. That's good. And I'm glad that there's some, some history behind that, especially for, again, those, low income, individuals that would struggle with home ownership without a program like this.
Yeah, and thanks for that conversation. I think that's really helpful too, to clarify the program for those that are in the audience. They may not be familiar with Community Land Trust. So in the interest of time, I'd like to move over to Joe, so that way we have some more time at the end to talk about both partnerships and some of these concepts at the end. So with that, Joe, take it away.
Great, thanks, Clay. So those of you who know me probably are aware that I do a really poor job of trying to color inside the lines. So when Sue first reached out and said, hey, what are some innovative things that we can be doing? What are some partnerships that you've done that have shown great results? And what I heard is, what are the things that we can do to nibble at the edge? And so I took it a little bit step further. And so what you're going to hear is something that's completely of my own invention. And my opinions are those of my own. So I'm not here representing Impact Development Fund per se, or any other associations that I have in the community. So that way they have, safe harbor from anything that you hear from me tonight. So if you don't like that, blame Sue. But with that, I think that I want to start with just a question. If anybody knows in Fort Collins history, just a little trivia question. What was so special about January 14th of 2020? And
well, Joe, it's my mom's birthday on January 14th. So I think that's a pretty important date every year.
Excellent. I'm glad you brought that up.
Maybe that you were invited to come speak to a city ad hoc committee.
Except that was a year ago. We're January, he's in 2020.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe, fair enough.
Yeah. Darren, I'm afraid I haven't been asked to speak to too many ad hoc committees, but
that was sort of my point.
There was the Epic Homes meeting on the 14th of last year.
Well, I was thinking a little something more profound. January 14th, 2020 was a day in our lives before COVID. And
Yeah.
I think from every day therefore or thereafter, we've seen some profound changes. And what I'd like you to do is just indulge me for a minute. And as we progress through this, just have a tape running in the back of your mind, a little video reel of everything that you can remember happening over the past 12 months. And, with all the things that are going on, just let that kind of, again, roll in the back of your mind as I go through this, because that'll provide some context. So what I'm proposing is something that, to my knowledge, has never been done before. And so it's really intended to be more of a provocative sort of presentation to get you thinking in terms of how do we really change the game. And so what I'm proposing is the Fort Collins Housing Challenge. And if you would just flip the screen. So what we're talking about is, a $5 million X Prize. And it's an open competition. Groups from throughout the planet can put together proposals that deliver socially, environmentally, economically sustainable housing without the benefit of public subsidy. And if you'll flip the screen, the next. So this competition will target households that are at or between 60% and 100% of median income. And even though it says rent level, it really should say housing cost. Unit size and configuration mix are appropriate for housing that meets the needs of that target population. So if you look at right now, cross-section of our community, folks that are in that 60 to 100% of median income, there's going to be so many households that are between 60 and 70%, so many between 70 and 80 on up. Also within that cohort, you're going to have so many single person households, you're going to have so many 2-person households, etc. And so what this competition is doing is soliciting responses from the private sector who will actually develop housing that approximately mirrors that cohort in our population that currently lives here, and what their needs are, what their income capacity is. And so really it's designed to be very responsive to that target audience. If you would flip to the next slide, please. So within that, all the entries would have to deliver a minimum of 50 housing units, dwelling units. And again, it could be rental, it could be home ownership, it could be, some hybrid or mix thereof, but they would all have to meet 5 criteria. Number one, the property would have to be durable. So we're not talking about the kinetic sculpture challenge, trying to push cardboard across the reservoir. The property would also have to be demonstrate that they are healthy and safe, and healthy, from a whole person perspective, healthy for all the residents of the property, as well as the community at large. The property would also have to be comfortable, and meaning that we wouldn't find it acceptable to assume that, say, 2 adults, a dependent, and a dog could live comfortably in a 1-bedroom apartment. So again, it had to be responsive to the population. Would have to be affordable in perpetuity. So again, what that means is as you put together a project, you're going to have to build into your budget a way to put replacement reserves away, so that that property can be refreshed over time, so that again it is operating without any public subsidy at any point now or in the future. But more critically, I think, to attract the sponsor, it has to be replicable. So this has to be something that can be done again under similar circumstances, and from the lessons that are learned from this process, be able to again repeat that, maybe in Fort Collins, maybe in other communities, but again, it has to prove viable. And so, if you will, next slide. I'm appropriating a term from one of my colleagues that I think this really captures it. But tabula rasa, what that means is that it's free of preconceived notion, a clean slate. So what that means is all code requirements are null and void. There are no zoning limitations. There are no building and land use codes. There are no impact fees. There are no neighbors and neighboring communities that are considered through this process. And more importantly, again, for the folks on this call, city staff is encouraged to engage with all the entrants, but you're going to lack the authority to modify, preclude, or deny proposals based on your interpretation of the rules that don't exist. So next slide, please. So additional considerations. So this is a critical one, I think, given the cost of development today. The full cost of water delivery and taps have to be considered within your budget. But to the extent that the project may lie within the City of Fort Collins utility service, water utility service, the proposal may include a modification of the water budget allotment. So how much water is allotted per tap? And again, we'll talk about this, but the entrants, as part of their proposal, would have to disclose and justify all the deviations from all these code standards and fees, including that water usage or water allotment budget. The viability of the proposal can't be dependent on the award of prize money. So it has to be able to, again, be replicable without the benefit of that prize money. The prize money is there to encourage, again, a process that we'll talk about on the next slide, but a very robust process. The total housing payment can't exceed 30% of household income for the population that it's serving. I mentioned this before, but it has to remain affordable in perpetuity. And the entrants must disclose the identity of all parties that have a financial interest in the proposal, so that, again, there's a great deal of transparency throughout. If you'll flip to the next. So the city would be asked to assist community partners, raise awareness of the contest, facilitates implementation, but it's not leading it. It'll be led by the entrants themselves. So once there's this initial kind of introduction, if you will, not just coming to grips internally as a city as to how this would work and what the, defining all the terms, et cetera, there'd be a tremendous amount of community outreach just to educate the broader community about what this competition is, what it's about, and what we're trying to accomplish with it. And through that, the entrance into this contest would really be, it'd be incumbent upon them to do a lot of that outreach themselves. And you'll see why. But they would have 12 months to do their community outreach, develop a viable proposal, and submit the entry. And then there would be a panel of subject matter experts that would be comprised of, again, city officials, private sector experts, as well as representatives of the prize sponsor. And what they would be doing is identifying any critical deficiencies in a proposal that, again, would challenge the viability of it. And so once that that panel has anointed, if you will, one or more entrants, or they may determine that none of them actually meet kind of a minimum threshold, but there could be more than one. And at that point, then it goes to a community-wide referendum. And rather than allowing the neighbors and staff to really define what a project is and the relative merits of these proposals, it's the whole community. So it's not even a municipal election. It's would be open to everybody that's 18 years or older, whether or not they're a registered voter. In some cases, we've got populations that are discouraged from being a registered voter. There are others that are precluded from being registered voters. And this would be open to everyone that's 18 years or older that lives in our community. And any proposals, any and all proposals that collect at least a 67% approval, that proposal will be referred to planning and zoning for further assessment. However, the P&Z rules on that, it would automatically be kicked up to City Council for final approval. And the prize monies would not be awarded until that project is not only approved, but actually complete and stabilized, meaning that it's occupied. And at that point, then they would be eligible to collect their prize. And again, it may be one, it may be more, or maybe none actually qualify, but that the prize money would be split pro rata based on how you fare in the referendum, up to 5. I mean, you certainly wouldn't want to have more than 3 or 5 projects, I think, at any one time, but that's how it would break out. So if you will, the next slide. So the desired benefits. So as I said up front, there's no public subsidy. However, if the city determines, whether it's again at the P&Z level or at the council level, that there are certain elements that must be present in that proposal in order for it to be deemed acceptable, that would be a liability that the city would have to participate in. So in other words, the city can't come back in and say, yeah, the community wanted this, but we really insist that we have 8-foot setbacks or whatever it happens to be. The city would have some liability for covering some of that cost. And therefore, the city is actually limiting its participation to what it deems absolutely necessary, not just what code says, but what it deems to be absolutely necessary. Multiple contact points and outreach formats and awareness of the competition would dramatically increase the level of community engagement, because now what we have is community residents are allowed to say, I want affordable housing, and we hear that quite frequently, quite vocally, but at the same time, they're saying we also want open space. And unfortunately, you can't have both. Those are two diametrically opposed objectives. And so what this is forcing to do is community to reconcile its own priorities and say, what is it that's important to me and what's in the best interest of my long-term health in this community as well as those that will follow. And so when you have competitors that are going after a large sum of money, you're going to see an amazing amount of community engagement through channels that we don't currently use and are frankly are not conducive to a city-led process. I think this would also surface archaic and outdated code standards that really facilitate a consideration of the costs and benefits of those standards. Because to sit back now and to look at the stacks and stacks and stacks of codes and regs, it's hard to determine what actually is relevant and what's archaic and what really needs to be modified, because you're just starting from page one and working your way through the millions of pages that those entail. This would help surface those and help identify what is important, again, as a community. And after having talked with several developers who are not currently active in the city of Fort Collins, by the way, when I just ran this by to get some feedback, what I heard over and over again was that it's entirely possible that, and really likely, that you would see proposals that exceed our current standards. And what I heard was that you were going to see projects that we don't even envision right now, especially if you're talking about, again, a prize of this size and opening it up to, advertising it to the world. You'll see some incredibly innovative solutions to a problem that we're all addressing. And unfortunately, to this point, I think that we're trying to pick and choose bits and pieces of what other communities have done. But those communities are themselves struggling with trying to solve this answer. And so by turning the knobs just a little bit and expecting a different outcome than what everyone else has expected, I think is the definition of insanity. And so what I'm proposing here is let's blow all that up. Let's start over. And so as this kind of that tape looped in your mind, I think one of the, if you're like me, one of the common themes, if you will, is that, the residents of our community, the residents of our country, they're demanding changes, significant changes. And right now, I think we have a generational opportunity for profound reorientation of how we describe housing and what that housing looks like, and how we address the problem, and how we address a lot of the inequalities that, again, are coming to the surface once again. Some of us on the call remember the 1960s, and we know that change ain't pretty. And we can define that, or we can let it happen to us. And so what I'm suggesting is that we try to be a little more bold in our thinking and courageous enough to follow through on what seems to be an insurmountable problem with affordable housing. And this is maybe one way of tackling it and reorienting the conversation. And so with that, I'll open it up to any questions or utter silence.
Thank you, Joe. Clay, was there anything else with the panel or just open discussion?
It is now open for discussion. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Great, thank you. Ken or Russ, would you like to go first?
Sure. Oh, Ross, go ahead. You got your hand
Well,
up.
I just have one quick question. Yeah, you mentioned that there would be no zoning restrictions on. So you're anticipating that this X Prize would be specific proposals for specific parcels.
Mm-hmm.
And so your intention would be that if it's zoned commercial and industrial, that should be fair game.
Right.
I don't say yes or no that that's a good idea. It's just I'm just trying to clarify.
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, so the participants themselves would have to identify the parcel that they are would be the subject of their project, and obviously would have to have the consent of the owner to pursue it, of course. So it'd have to be a willing seller, willing buyer. But yeah, there is no zoning. There is no density.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and Joe, man, I love it. I've had questions, but say it may not work, but just the excitement of going through the process might help us learn some things, even if nothing's, like you said, you could award all the money or none of the money, right? If you were to do something like this.
Right.
And so, to me, even if you went through a process like this and almost in a sense, nothing happened, if I'm understanding it right, the potential of learning could be immense. and actually time saving and cost saving to, you know, to go through the process. And it does seem like, even though, you know, we're talking about, you know, regardless of housing codes, we're still talking about those critical elements of it. You didn't have to be safe and sustainable and environmental and, you know, economical and et cetera, on down the line. It has to go through an approval process. I mean, so and it has to be finally voted on by everybody, anybody, everybody type thing. I mean, so there's some, you know, obviously a lot of checks and balances in terms of the final project and product and the needs that are being addressed and how those are being addressed, and being able to, you know, give a lot of, you know, input to it, if I understand the process right. And so it's a, you know, it's almost like it sounds like an application of, you know, of acceptable zoning criteria by the masses. I mean, or
Right.
by a process. I don't know. I don't want to, but I mean, I think it's, yeah, I love the thought process. Now, hey, Joe, since you're doing some stuff nationwide, you know, my understanding is, and I'm trying to think, I thought it was somewhere in Texas, was you know, someplace that was maybe rebuilding after, you know, hurricane or extensive damage, where they almost, if I understand right from what I heard, it was like they almost suspended their zoning and building codes, and almost ended up with products and houses that met or exceeded the building codes that were in place, by just saying, hey, what will it take to get housing restored and make it, you know, affordable and available, and at the same time, you know, meeting those critical requirements. Is that, anything like that sound familiar to you?
It does. After Katrina, we did see that, and I don't know that it may have been in Texas, but I know we did see that in the Gulf states, where they did. Well, they had, in some cases, they had very limited zoning restrictions to begin with, but ultimately, what these folks are doing, what these developers are looking at is, you know, especially if it's a rental project that they're going to have their hand in forever, you know, they're not going to build something that is going to create problems for themselves down the road, right? So that's why it almost is a moot point to say there are no codes, because they're going to build probably better than what we have. Just because it's spurring that innovative thought process. What can we do differently if we don't have to necessarily even think about rectangles, you know, assemblage of rectangles to create housing. You can see some very innovative kinds of responses. And there are things that are being done all over the world that are very, very innovative that would never fly here. In fact, Ken, I've heard more than a few developers say it's actually illegal to build affordable housing in Fort Collins because of the standards and so forth. You just can't deliver at that.
Yeah.
So if you suspend those rules, you may find that we can accomplish an awful lot and actually still meet, you know, 80–90% of everything that we expect of every development.
Yeah, that's exciting. Hey, Darren, what about the, it's interesting, didn't you mention when last time you visited Community First in Austin, that there was a 3D printed home or something like that?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how big it was or what it was like. I mean, but when Joe mentioned, you know, creative solutions or things we'd never think about, I mean, you know, not that it would fit or find final approval, but just, you know, just the freedom to think creatively that it might actually fly. You know, it's kind of like, you know, just the enthusiasm and momentum of something like that could carry us for the next few years, even if nothing happened. No, I'm just being somewhat facetious with that. But I mean, I think that's the, you know, if we're going to really, you know, address housing in an innovative and creative fashion, we at least have to be open to some of the concepts Joe has presented. Hey, now where does the $5 million come from, Joe? Is that city funds then?
Nope, nope. I would propose to you, Ken, that if the city wanted to pursue this, benefactors would find the city of Fort Collins to put up that money.
Wow,
Because
interesting.
this is again, a universal problem.
Yeah,
And there are those who would want to see this level of innovation that can be replicated in other places. So in other words, a benefactor is buying the intellectual property that's developed through this process that they can apply in other places.
yeah, that'd be interesting.
But if you're willing to step up, that would short circuit that process of looking for the benefactor.
What's interesting, what's interesting, if nothing else, and like say, even if a project didn't find final approval, especially since there really are quite a few hoops to, jump through when you talk about, scrutiny of even the council and the approval process and so forth like that, and finally a vote. If it identified weaknesses and challenges in our building codes, it would actually save the city money from the investment we're getting ready to make to, like and I like your reference relative to the process of building codes of just trying to go through it systematically, looking for things, opposed to just going to those who are actually involved in building and making it work and getting from them the things that really you may drive up costs, but don't make that much difference in terms of the final outcome. If that makes sense. Anyway, yeah.
And you'll notice another key element though was the again, very defined timeline for doing this, so that it's not something that drags out for 2 years. They have 12 months to put together and propose their project.
Yeah.
So I'd like to step in here real quick. We want to move on to the next item here in a few minutes.
Oh, no, we do have to. Oh, no.
Sorry, Councilmember Summers. So I'd really like to hear from. I know we always pack these agendas really tight, so I'd like to hear from both Councilmember Gergel and Councilmember Caniff as well.
So yeah, X Prizes have been very successful in several industries and several government, public-private partnerships. Aerospace, particularly, is where it took off. So I think I like the concept of X Prize. I think there are details here we need to iron out. Because as a city, we might be able to be willing to give up some commercial parcels for affordable housing or some industrial, but not all of them, right? Because we have an interest also in making sure that we have space for sales tax revenue rather from commercial. So there's going to be a balance here. And I heard what you said that the city might also have a skin in the game in terms of paying for any cost overruns or cost consequences of things that turn out to be important. So I think if we were to move in this direction, we want to set maybe a little more, few more guide rails than what Joe says, but maybe not a lot more. And I like the idea of seeing if there is, because I was thinking as you were talking about this, this is the perfect kind of thing for like a Bloomberg challenge or something where a charitable benefactor who wants to make positive change in society can make a mark. So I guess, so I think it's worthy to further think about and develop and maybe see if there are benefactors that might be willing to go in this direction, but also with the caveat that I don't think the community is going to be as willing to throw everything out, but I think they could potentially give exemptions for a lot of things that we might find difficult. And I think that's going to require a little bit of council interaction ahead of time, but I understand the big picture. The vision here, Joe, is complete tabula rasa. I'm suggesting that maybe we put graph paper lines on the tabula rasa, right? So a
couple preconceived notions.
Yeah. I mean, again, more safety guardrails than, because we've already identified, for example, the density is a problem with affordable housing, right? That our codes that have maximum on density in various zone districts makes it impossible for some types of affordable housing projects to pencil out. So, and so I think that rather than try to identify all those things that are obstacles, figure out that minimum set of things that, you know, sorry, if you came with a proposal that said that we're going to pave City Park, that's a non-starter, right? So, so that's that's my suggestion on the kind of maybe navigating in between there.
Thank you, Ross. Okay, I'll try and make my comments brief, especially because my husband will be home and then my dogs will lose their mind from excitement. So, Steph, I did, thank you so much for your presentation. I know that we've been talking about Joe's. I also just wanted to let you know that I sit on the Housing Catalyst board, and before me, Ross did. So we were both familiar with your project. So I'm really glad that you're able to share it. And I'm really excited as someone who sits on the board, and all of my backyard neighbors are those houses that are being sold to you. So I hope that some of my neighbors get to stay, but I'm really excited to watch that process as someone who sees those houses every day. I did have one question for you. Was when I think about partnerships, and you said the city reached out to you about this, when I think of partnerships in the city, is it usually that a city comes to you or you look for a partnership? And how, I think, you know, Joe also talked about relationship with developers and innovative partnerships. What's the easiest for you, or what do you look for, and how does the city build more of those?
That is a good question, and one that is gonna have a, you know, everything's different answer. So first, let me back up to just give some credit where credit is due to say that the meeting where all of this kind of came together actually was convened by the Bohemian Foundation. And so I did not mention them as partners, but they were absolutely the folks convening, getting all those people around the table, right? That, you know, that information came out and we could think of this to begin with, right? So, and that convening is really so important. Often just are sitting with people at a table where you wouldn't have normally, and you're just throwing out ideas and it pops something up and someone says, you know, that made me think of this other person. And so much comes from that. And just to reflect also on Joe's note about the pandemic, is like, that's something we lose a lot of, I think, by not being in person and you know, being in this environment constantly. So it's nice to have the opportunity to talk about innovation, even when we can't be in person. I would say it is a combination of who is that convener and how these things happen. So often we will be talking with developers who want to do a project and aren't quite sure how to make it pencil. And we can do two things. And the first thing we do is completely convolute and muddy the waters because we are making it way complex. But that's just the nature of it. And I think, you know, everyone in real estate says if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. We have to make it super, you know, we have to bring in a lot of partners to make this kind of work happen. A lot of funding sources, a lot of just minds thinking from different places. Then often from there, what we will do is approach the municipality. And our reasoning for doing that is first and foremost because we were created to be a public-private partnership. So when we put in subsidy dollars, one of the first things that we need to have is we're going to match public subsidy. And that could be a city, a county, the state, a public housing authority, or a combination of all of those things, right? That those public dollars that you know, we want to leverage. So we want to have that public commitment and to come in then with our philanthropic subsidies. So we can't do it with just our philanthropic subsidy, and we can't do it with just public funds either. So it's really important to us that we match those two before starting out. So, I mean, that's the first thing a developer will do is say, you have all this money, you should come in and fill the gap. But a couple of things we find is, first of all, what people think, and people, I mean, developers think is going to fill the gap, which is, we'll have you buy the land, or we'll have the city donate the land. And that doesn't close the gap. When we're looking at housing prices that continue to escalate and escalate, the gap is just getting bigger and bigger. And so we need to pull together as many pieces to kind of fit that puzzle as possible. So often, and another project we have in Fort Collins, where we've got the state in it as well. City's donating the land. We're bringing philanthropic subsidy. The developer is really acting as a fee developer and minimizing their profit. I mean, everybody has to give in order to get to the place where we're able to create these opportunities that we know are very important, if not critical, to our communities.
Well, thank you so much. And I think, when you talk about kind of that collaboration and sitting in a room together and thinking, I was interested in what Joe was talking about, and now hearing you and kind of those barriers and being able to just throw around ideas is so important. Now, I think, I get more excited about Joe's idea of kind of a competition and driving innovation and seeing what people come up with. Ross, I understand your point about putting more guardrails, but I also think that when you have no guardrails, then those proposals that really understand the community and that fit would go forward. And if somebody wanted to pave City Park, that would never move forward. So I think by kind of removing that, you do get those true innovative, and the ones that really fit us would kind of rise to the top. And so that's what I kind of like about this no rules situation that Joe was talking about, and also identifying a plot of land. So I think there would be some that probably the land would have to be somewhat vacant or for sale, or in the, coming up for sale, which would eliminate some things. And really just, I think that when I look at the housing strategic plan as well, which we'll talk about, there's a lot of talk about creativity and collaboration and choice. And I think that fits really nicely with, we are seen as an innovative city, and housing has not been a space I think we've been really innovative in. And I think we have a lot of rules to prevent that. And so I like this idea of, I don't know what the future of housing looks like. And I'm sure someone has thought about it, and it's going to be really creative and could really fit with what we're looking for. So I don't know, I'm excited about it. And I think I really like the community engagement part, and then also having the community vote on it, which is, I think, a fun idea of really getting a lot of people's feedback, and something that not a lot of people are interested in, because when we start talking about things like land use code, everyone loses interest. And this is a way to really talk about housing and living in a community. And so I think it would be really fun and interesting. So I think we can do it. Oh, so thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
You warned us.
Yes, thank you to all of our panelists for tonight. I'll turn it over to Clay for a quick summary of the discussion, and then we'll transition into our next topic. And I already can know that a part of Clay's summary is that we clearly could have spent the entire meeting on just this topic alone. So thank you all very much for your time, and to the committee members for your engagement as well. Clay?
Yeah, I think for a quick summary, just sounds like there's just general interest in partnerships, that there's an interest in the community land trust model and what it means, and how this particular partnership came together in Fort Collins. Also too, with Epic Homes, sounds like just a little bit more digging there. Just a little bit of background. We were actually sharing some information in the background. It looks like that's something that we explored early on in the community land trust discussion. However, just because of the way that the lien works on properties and the position of the loan for Epic Homes, it didn't 100% help out the homeowner. And so that's something that we can explore more and see if that's another barrier that we can explore in further discussions to try and create a program that would work better with the community land trust model. And then it just sounded like just a lot of excitement and interest in Joe's idea about this competition and really exploring innovative ways to think about yeah, just the way that development can occur in Fort Collins and meet a lot of community objectives, I would say overall is sort of my summary there. With that, Lindsay, I'll turn it back over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And thanks again to Joe and Stefka. And we'd of course love for you to stay the rest of the time if you're available too. And so Council, I have the pleasure of kicking off our next topic, which is, as we mentioned, the review of the initial set of prioritized strategies that are included in the draft plan that was just released last night. Tonight, we have two different items that we wanted to talk with you all about. We're thinking just from a time adjustment that we might hold off on the guiding principles unless we do have time for those, because we also plan to talk with the full council about the guiding principles at the January 26th work session. And so we want to make sure that you all have the time you want to spend on the deep dive on strategies tonight. So if we get through those, then we're happy to transition to guiding principles. And if you want to spend the full time on strategies, of course, it's your meeting. And so you all decide how you want to spend your time. With that, I will turn us over to Molly Fitzpatrick with Root. And then the key guiding questions is, what feedback do you have on this refined set of strategies? And then Molly will actually give you some additional questions to consider as she reviews this as well. So Molly, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thanks to the committee for having me come and just kind of walk through some of these strategies with you all tonight. As Lindsay said, we'll do our best to get through and save you some time or save some time for other agenda items. We'll just see how the conversation goes as well. I wanted to start just with a quick recap on kind of how we got to where we are currently, not the entire process, but as you know, this was a fairly there was a lot of effort on the front end in generating ideas for what should go into the strategic plan, lots of community engagement, lots of staff input, lots of council input as well, including a lot of the ideas that this committee has already identified as quick wins. So I just want to kind of briefly walk through. We started with all of these findings, community engagement, staff and stakeholder input. We also did some best practices research as Root, the consultant. And then also pulled in findings from previous city reports and ongoing city efforts like the land use code audit. That generated over 100 just ideas about what should we do to help solve some of these challenges. We kind of came in at that point and then helped kind of roll those into what we're calling a strategy toolkit. And so that strategy toolkit is really the initial list of all the potential strategies that reflects all of the ideas for the most part that were generated. We just consolidated those, kind of cleaned up duplication of ideas, and then put those into more of a policy context to create that strategy toolkit. Once we had that, we started working through just some evaluation framework. I believe you've all seen that as well. So looking at that vision alignment, making sure there's equity in the process as well as in the outcomes. Looking at feasibility, as well as the impact of each strategy and cost. That's kind of our baseline evaluation framework that we worked through as a consultant, but then also worked through with staff feedback on each of those 50 strategy toolkits. So in order to really kind of become one of the priorities that we're recommending as part of the draft priorities, it has to meet those baseline standards, right, of the evaluation framework. And then we also have conducted some staff workshops and best practices research to help us craft what we're pulling out as kind of the top 20 some odd priorities around these actions. So this prioritization is still ongoing. Obviously, we want to hear your priorities tonight as well, what you think should be in, shouldn't be in, what your reactions are to each of the things. We had a meeting with the Home to Health group as well earlier this week, I think, maybe last week, and then also council work session, boards and committees, and also wanting to hear from the community. So this is ongoing. This is not set in stone, but we've done kind of the first cut and are excited to hear your thoughts on those priorities tonight. So as Lindsay mentioned, we're looking for your feedback generally. These guiding questions that are on the screen now are I think, our attempt to get you thinking about some of the reactions. So we don't have to answer each of these specifically for every single one, but just keep these in mind as we walk through the strategies as you're thinking about kind of your first reaction as well as some more thoughtful reactions. So do these priorities reflect what you've heard from your constituents and from the community during outreach? Do you see these strategies as really positively impacting the things we've identified as housing challenges? What kinds of impacts do you think that these strategies could have? What excites you most about what's on the list? What, if anything, gives you some heartburn about what's on the list? And then as we get to the end as well, was there anything you were hoping or expecting to see in this list that maybe isn't fully represented, or that you'd like us to consider it in potentially a different way? So I just encourage you to keep these in mind. We will come back to them as well as we get closer to the end, but keep those in mind as we kind of walk through. The format for kind of how we have this structured tonight, as you've seen, assuming that you've taken at least a quick look at some of these prioritized strategies, is that they're grouped around the greatest challenges that were identified in the existing conditions report. And so as we walk through these tonight, we're going to take them in chunks initially and kind of walk through each strategy or action in its group of kind of the primary greatest challenge that it is designed to address. A lot of these address a lot of those challenges. You know, there's some that actually address all of the greatest challenges. So you'll see that as we move throughout. So we're going to take them in chunks. We'll debrief a bit after each chunk or each group of these strategies, but then we'll come back at the end as well and have a look kind of at all of them at once to say, what do you think, you know, what were you expecting to see that may not be there? Kind of talk about them more collectively as well. So we'll kind of go through in chunks. We'll pause to talk about each one, and then we'll reassess at the end as well. I'm going to do my best to kind of work through it fairly quickly with you, but please feel free to stop me and ask questions, clarify what these are, what the purpose of them are, why they're in here. So feel free to interrupt. We can dialogue as we go. And as you can see on the screen now, this is our first set. These are the ones that are most specifically related to the first greatest challenge, which is that price escalation affects everyone, but it disproportionately impacts Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as low-income households. So we'll start here. You can see the structure of the table kind of has the strategy, a brief description, the expected outcome, so what we're hoping to achieve with this strategy, and then also how it aligns with community recommendations. I'm not going to read through every kind of row and column on the chart because I don't think you want me to do that. This is already sort of a wonky enough conversation since we're delving into 20 some odd strategies. But again, pause if you want to talk about anything in more depth. I'll try to give kind of a quick overview of each, but happy to answer any deep dive questions and all of that as we get started. So with that long caveat, we'll jump in here to this first group. Again, acknowledging that this is the greatest challenge it addresses. The vision alignment here is primarily focused on the everyone component of the vision, or really the equity portion of the vision. So you can see that there. And you'll also notice as we go, anything that's a strategy that's marked with a little asterisk at the beginning is something you have already identified as a quick win. So we want to make sure that those are getting acknowledged here. So assess displacement and gentrification risk, which we've talked about as that map that illustrates the threat of displacement and gentrification. That's strategy 1. The second one is to promote inclusivity, housing diversity, and affordability as community values. This is a bit vague, and actually tying in Joe's conversation, that is something that could kind of actually help speak to this and help bring some energy around some of these issues. So there's a lot of innovative ways we could do kind of this general community value promotion. But generally speaking, we're talking about prioritizing practices that include storytelling, culturally appropriate engagement, a broad range of communities, especially those that are considered historically marginalized and underrepresented, and focusing on issues related to density, structural racism, the need for and myths about affordable housing. So some sort of creative, innovative projects would help kind of garner some support around this, give opportunities and platforms to talk about those myths as well. So something to think about there. And then number 3 is implement the 2020 analysis of fair housing choice action steps. So the city did conduct, as is required by HUD, an analysis of impediments to fair housing being the intersection of civil rights and housing. And so looking at not just ways to prevent discrimination, but actually to improve housing equity, to increase access to opportunity and address some of those systemic barriers to people of color and other protected classes. So there's great information already in that report, and we just wanted to highlight that and elevate it here, that some of that work is already happening, and we can ensure to keeping that at the forefront and making sure we're implementing those practices as well. So as I mentioned, these are all aligned with the vision around equity. The outcomes on these are really focused on improving housing choice, improving equity, and addressing that. That also in some cases addresses specifically stability and preservation as well. And with that, I'll kind of pause and answer any questions you might have about these, and also just get your initial thoughts, kind of gut reaction to these. You know, what excites you about this list? What maybe gives you heartburn? What are you excited to see? Is this aligned with what you're hearing from your constituents and residents as well?
Hey, let me ask a question. These, I guess GC is what, greatest challenge? Are these ranked in?
Oh, great question. They are not ranked in any sort of priority order. No, they're just organized around the greatest challenges. So these were the 3 of our list of 23 that we felt like are most aligned or primarily aligned with the greatest challenge, the first greatest challenge. And so that really drives the order. It's not a prioritization.
But I mean, as far as the first greatest challenge, is the first greatest challenge the most important greatest challenge? Or, I mean, were you addressing the 1, 2, and 3, or are you addressing?
Right. So, and we did not, I guess, kind of jump back and provide that context that as part of the existing conditions report, there were 7 greatest challenges that were actually identified as challenges in really achieving the housing vision, which is that all people in Fort Collins have stable, healthy housing they can afford. I'll do a quick run through on those. They're not, as far as I know, in a priority order. And so this is really just kind of following the framework that's been laid out. But just as a quick recap, the first one is that there's disproportionate impacts of price escalation on certain populations. The second, go ahead.
You know, just to save time, yeah, I
Okay.
reviewed those, so that's fine. I just was asking about if the greatest challenge number 1 was what was viewed in the past as the most important or not. Hey, I do have a question in terms of that challenge, and I guess I just need a little bit of cultural education and perspective. It says price escalation impacts everyone and disproportionately impacts BIPOC and low-income households. So help me understand. So if a person is of an ethnicity group and they're a high income earner, they're still disadvantaged in terms of housing availability or housing affordability. Is that what that is saying? And what's the basis of that here in Fort Collins?
Right. Sorry, Lindsay, did you want to jump in or did you want me to answer?
Yeah,
I'm happy to.
Molly, if you want to, I'm happy to, and happy to address it too. So go ahead if you want to start.
Great. I'll give kind of some broad context, and then Lindsay, I'll let you jump in with any more specific response on Fort Collins. Broadly speaking, we're talking on average. And so we're saying, I guess there's 2 components here. One is that on average, BIPOC populations do have lower incomes and have a lower ability to, or lower growth in their wage categories and in typical industries. So there is a purely economic component just based on the statistics around which groups have which incomes and which education levels. So in that sense, when you're saying, yes, a person of color or minority that has a high income, they're not necessarily on that element facing any sort of discrimination. Aside from that, there is discrimination in the market. We know that to be true. And there is also kind of this historical element related to fair housing, in which we have had housing policies as a country, not just as a city of Fort Collins, but as a country, we've had long-term housing policies that have limited access to home ownership and other tax breaks and a kind of a host of things that have made it more difficult on average for some population groups to build wealth, pass down home ownership, all of those things. So that there's quite a bit of history, I think, in the existing conditions report that may be worth taking a look at, but we're speaking kind of from a systemic perspective. This continues to be the case even today around some lending practices, even when we're looking at algorithms. There's lots of academic research, which we don't want to get into probably tonight, that does actually systemically make that more of a challenge for certain groups. But there is also the economic element that you're referencing as well. That's kind of the very broad and very short, I guess, response to that general question.
You know, and I'm not interested in 50 years ago or what's happening in other communities. I'm kind of interested in what's happening in Fort Collins today. Okay.
Yep. Oh, go ahead.
And so, yeah, my response, my heartburn, my response to this is looking at it. It sounds kind of racist to say all Black, Indigenous, and people of color face identically the same challenges. That seems like a generalized statement. I know that can be true for some or maybe for many, but I don't think it's for all. For example, some of our Asian community in Fort Collins are some of our highest wage earners. And so, but anyway, moving on, because some of these, I mean, I can understand the assessment, assessing displacement and gentrification, analysis of fair, number 2 seems like, I think number 2 is actually, while a difficult one, is probably important, because if there's an impediment to affordable housing, it's people that complain about the affordability of housing, but they don't want affordable housing built. And so if that's what that's addressing, then, I think that's important. Now, I don't know how you deal with that other than when you're going through a housing proposal and somebody writes an email or makes a comment to the city council, you basically tell them they're being inappropriate in their comments. I don't know. So I don't know if that stigma is for people who view affordable housing with disdain and don't really understand, the need and what that means. I remember one time at a meeting, I said, affordable housing doesn't necessarily mean inadequate housing. If you're talking about building it anyway. I know there's quote unquote housing that is, probably, we have a lot of old homes in Fort Collins. And so just like we were talking about in our previous discussion, there's a need for, renovation and updates. But I'm talking about new quote unquote affordable housing projects. Those don't necessarily, affordable housing doesn't have to be equated with quote unquote, cheap or inadequate or insufficient. And so, I guess those are some of the things that are, battles we're going to have to face from that, from that standpoint moving forward. And I know I had a discussion with Lindsay on this. I'm really interested on the, not the anecdotal things, but the, follow up on any discrimination when it comes to housing and lending practices. And, if we hear of that or know of that, my question is, why isn't somebody doing something about it? And so that's a failure of somebody. That's a failure of our attorney's office, of our district attorney, of the state, of somebody, because, like you say, we've had federal legislation in place for for a long time to to address those issues. So anyway, that's those are just my observations about that one.
Good, thanks.
Yeah, Ross?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Just real fast. So I continue to like the assessment of displacement and gentrification risk, both as a short-term win and as something that, getting down to practical analysis of what it is that we're facing in Fort Collins. And then the other one that jumps out at me here, actually, we did an analysis, we have an analysis that lists these 1 through 6 steps on the fair housing choice. And these are specific things that we know can improve in general specific situations. And I think this is actually kind of to Ken's point. These are things that we know are areas that need improvement, and that we could, as a city, have a significant role, disproportionate even to the amount of money that we spend on it, to help people established credit to infrastructure and public engagement, housing environment for people with disabilities. That the number 3, I think, is frankly a good recommendation for a really good, in fact, I'm starting to get even more excited about it, but a medium term kind of action for the next council. So.
Thank you. And Molly, I would say the only thing I have to add is that the committee has been talking a lot about financial literacy programs, and it seems like it would be included in number 3, or maybe that's the intent, but I just didn't see it listed. So I just wanted to call attention to that. That is something I think we've heard and have been talking about here, that if it could be incorporated into the plan, that would be helpful as well. I will also just say that I think since we have the read before materials, if it's quicker to not have to read everything to us as we go through,
Great.
That's totally fine. We can kind of move through that if that's helpful.
That's perfect. Thanks, Emily. I appreciate it. So yeah, moving along, this next group is related to the greatest challenge number 2, which is there aren't enough affordable places for people to rent or purchase, and what is available and affordable isn't necessarily the kind of housing people need. So you can see there's 5 policies here, 6, excuse me, which are all sort of related to this this vision alignment around affordable, healthy, and stable housing. And most of these are focused around increasing housing choice across the entire spectrum. So these aren't necessarily tied specifically to affordability exclusively, though some of them do include that as well. So just as kind of a quick overview here, we're talking about number 4, which is implementation, tracking, and assessment. 5 is advocate for housing related legislation at state and federal levels. 6 is a visitability policy, which relates to accessibility for mobility impaired residents. 7 is removing the barriers to development of accessory dwelling units. And then 8 and 9, you're very familiar with, I'm sure, because those are both committee recommendations on quick wins as well. So extending the city's affordability term, which is currently 20 years, and then also the off-cycle appropriation for the land use code phase 1. So in lieu of reading anything else, I'll pause there for additional discussion on this group of strategies. First thoughts, reactions, questions, concerns.
Yeah, thanks. Russ?
Yeah, first a question on visibility policy. Doesn't ADA kind of require that in 100% roughly? I mean,
it does not actually. So ADA does apply to, there are ADA standards obviously in the building code, and there are requirements around that. Those typically are applied to multifamily, and specifically certain elements of multifamily. So it applies to ground floor units. If there's no elevator, it applies to more units if you're over 4 stories. So it gets into some of that. This is really more, a visitability policy is targeted more to single family development, saying that you should require, not should require, but there are, a visitability policy would potentially require or incentivize developers that are building a large number of single family units to make a certain proportion of those meet visitable standards, which is not a full accessibility standard. It's just a certain width of doorways, a single one entrance to be a no step entry, and a bathroom that's accessible on the main level. So it's a lower standard than ADA, but it could be applied to a broader set of units.
I see. Okay.
I like, 7, 8, and 9, I think are good ones that could be, actually, I would even star 7. I think that could be an easy win and kind of see, forward on that. Yeah, the visitability policy, I mean, that would be interesting. I mean, especially as a disabled person myself, be interesting to see what that looks like in terms of main floor entrance. I mean, there's some townhomes and condos that I think of that kind of fit that mode, which is at least good. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know I mean, it sounds like it, if it could be worked out, it would be, I mean, it's great, but it could be one of those things, again, that if it's required is, a deterrent to affordable housing. Because, I mean, it's different from mean, you're talking about a visitability standard. So you're assuming that somebody who is not physically challenged or doesn't have a physical ability might be visited by somebody who does. And in case they are, that place needs to be accessible. And I mean, I think it'd be a great idea if it could happen, but you know, it's like great idea in theory. I'm just not sure how it works in practice, but if it could be worked out, I'm obviously, you know, all for it, you know, knowing that right now, even accessibility doesn't mean great accessibility if you're handicapped. But anyway, that's all I have to say there.
Yeah, and so kind of teeing up on that, I'd be interested to know if we could guess what on a typical single family home, how much cost it would add to the building of the house to require visibility. Because the converse of that is that a house that's visitable is more likely to be age in place, adaptable. It's not ready, but it's adaptable. If it's already got zero-step main entrance and halls that are wide enough on the main floor, at least, you know, it wouldn't have a walk-in shower. It wouldn't have grab bars everywhere. But it would be at least intermediate between a home that's not at all accessible and one that's fully accessible. I guess that's what I would like more information on how much that would cost. And I agree with Ken on the affordability term and the off-cycle appropriation. I think we should advance those. And then on the development of ADUs, not opposed to it, but am concerned that we would want to kind of, like I was suggesting to Joe, there's probably some parameters we'd want to establish so that these actually do stay affordable and don't become basically, I've seen some ADUs that are really high-priced rental units, right? They're not actually used as affordable, or they're used as short-term rentals. Now, our current short-term rental zoning will probably reduce that problems to some degree, but yeah, I think that there's, you know, again, not opposed to it, but I think there's some study that would need to be. That's actually one of the reasons I didn't put it on the short term. I think that's a medium term type thing to look at.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into, you know, that's kind of getting into the weeds, or we need to kind of get into the weeds of that. I was thinking more in terms of owner occupied, you know, kind of a mother-in-law, whatever type of
yeah,
opposed to it being an income I could see, Ross, you make a good point. I mean, you don't want it to be you know, just an opportunity for, you know, more rental properties that could be by square foot higher than a normal house or something.
Market rate, right?
Yeah.
And great points all around. I'll just respond quickly on the visitability policy. We can pull up some additional studies that have been done around the cost implications, which have been shown to be really minimal. City of Arvada is probably the nearest community that has had a visibility policy in place for quite some time. And so they're a great resource as well. If and as the city would want to move forward with something like that, Arvada is a great kind of bounce ideas off of and learn from their experience as well, because they've had it for quite some time.
Yeah, frankly, I would like to get the visibility policy, but would want to make sure that we're not adding $10,000 to the cost of
right. Absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
My intuition is that it's not going to be that high. The big cost probably being the zero-step entry.
Right.
But
and even that's generally the biggest design consideration that's different on visitability. Most standards are going to be pretty close on the bathroom and doorways already, and so it's just designing in a no-step entry.
Right. And then on number 5, I mean, we're going to be doing that anyway. I think it should just be put in there. We're going to be advocating at the state and federal level for legislation, so might as well include it. It doesn't mean we're doing necessarily much extra effort there. So.
Molly, I just have a couple of questions for you. So at the end, when it says it isn't affordable, isn't the kind of housing people need. Is there anything in here that talks about kind of forecasting housing trends, especially with changing population and family dynamics? And kind of, so I know we're in the thing it kind of talks about right now, but what about kind of forecasting population?
That is a great segue into the next slide, so we can jump into that after you ask your
Okay.
other questions as well.
Perfect.
But just to give you kind of a quick, talking about sub-goal development really speaks to where do we need to target our goals around housing development, particularly affordable.
Okay, great. My only other question is that number 9, so are these the initial set of strategies, or are these kind of like immediate or short term? Because I think, and I know it addresses at the bottom about updating the entire land use code. And so is this just the first step, or is those second, those steps coming later captured somewhere else?
Great question. This is the first step. This is kind of the first immediate action that's required on the land use code, implementing the land use code audit recommendations. We do acknowledge that the rest of the land use code audit recommendations should be carried forward as well as kind of a parallel or ongoing process. I'll punt to the staff team on kind of what the concrete next steps are and if those should be included as additional call out steps. But yes, we don't want to leave the rest of it behind. We want the entire audit to move forward, and this is step 1.
Okay, yeah, because I think my question was, is the strategy to update the land use code, or is it to do the phase 1 of the land use code?
This recommendation, and I see Lindsay unmuted, so I'll let her answer instead, so I don't butcher it.
And if we have any more detailed questions, Megan Overton is really our lead on this, and happy to bring her in. But this strategy is about implementing the first phase and really focusing on the housing related elements of the land use code. And then in the descriptions, we can address the future phases as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And those are all my questions. And
Great.
I think, what Ken talked about, I agree with as well. So thank you.
Perfect. Good comment. So this next step is related to the third greatest challenge. So acknowledging that the city does have tools already to encourage affordable housing, but current funding and incentives are not enough to meet the goals. So these strategies are pretty affordability focused. They're not the only affordability strategies in the plan, but these are closely tied to that. I'll kind of use this number 10, the refine a local affordable housing goal, to acknowledge your question as well, council member. And so this one really is acknowledging that the city has a goal, but it's kind of one generic goal that just says 80% of AMI. So target 10% of units to be affordable by 2040, affordable to 80% AMI. As part of refining this local affordable housing goal, there would be kind of an analysis of where are the needs, where are the most critical needs, how does that relate not just to AMI level, but also tenure, so renter versus owner or household size. So all of that could be incorporated as part of this, and we can actually even call that out a little bit more explicitly in the language of this goal, if that would be useful. So other prioritized strategies in this set are to create a dedicated revenue stream for affordable housing, kind of top considerations about how that would be likely to happen. Ideas that have come up are around a fee or tax that generates money. So that could be like an impact fee or property or sales tax, which would obviously be a vote of the people to approve that. 12, expanding partnerships with CDFIs on gap financing. 13 and 14, again, have already been identified by this group as quick wins. So recalibrate existing incentives and then look at additional incentives as well. So those two, 13 and 14, are really looking at how do we leverage private development to help us solve this problem so that not everything has to have city subsidy involved. So I'll pause there for reactions, questions, thoughts on this group.
Hey,
Yeah,
I like 12, 13, and 14. I get, well, 13 and 14 are starred. Certainly I think 12 makes sense. Yeah, 10's fine. 11's the one that I probably have the most heartburn of. We just mentioned something about that would take less community resources, but then we're trying to get more community resources by dedicated taxes and fees. And especially since there's a lot of effort on the state level, the federal level going on there. I'm not sure how high of a priority that should be on the local level.
Russ?
Yeah, I actually like all these, but I would maybe add Joe Rowan's X Prize idea here, right? I mean, I think it's worth exploring, even if we might tweak it somewhat.
Yeah, I think it would be great to add something about whether it's innovation or competition or something, incorporate Joe's proposal. And then to kind of your explanation earlier, Molly, about kind of expanding, looking at housing goals, not based more than just income level. That would be, I would like to see that as well.
Great. Any other thoughts or reactions on those? No, we're moving forward. Slide is moving forward. Let's keep it rolling. So this next group, you get 2 for 1 on this slide. We've got greatest challenge number 4, as well as greatest challenge number 5. So 4 is about job growth outpacing housing growth. 2 strategies under that category are explore and address financing and other barriers to missing middle and innovative housing development. I do want to note that that strategy has actually been rewritten a bit since you received the initial packet, and that is to kind of broaden it from just looking at financing barriers to really more of that innovative housing development. So just acknowledge that that's a bit tweaked based on feedback that we were getting from the original version. 16 is remove barriers to allow densities through code revisions. We actually talked about that a bit already tonight in previous presentations. And then the 3 under greatest challenge 5, which relate to housing being expensive to build, are reconsider affordable housing requirements as part of metro districts, which is already underway, increasing awareness and opportunities for collaboration across water districts and other regional partners. So acknowledging that water has an impact on housing, both its ability to be built, the capacity, as well as the cost. And then 19, bolstering the city land bank activity by allocating additional funding. So this would require additional funding. You know, as we've talked about in a previous challenge, acknowledging that there are tools in place. The land bank is one of them, but there's just not enough, you know, funding to really achieve the goals at present. And so this 19 is focusing on kind of leveraging programs that already work, but just bolstering those with more resource as possible. So any questions about those? And then if no questions, then we'll jump into your reactions and thoughts and priorities on these 2 groups.
Yeah, Rob?
Yeah, thanks. I guess number 17 kind of depends on where we go as a council with metro districts. So I would hesitate to put it on this list until we know that, because I for one, am concerned about the idea of metro districts being an affordable housing tool. For a variety of reasons. But other than that, I think all of these are useful strategies to explore. So.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Ken?
Yeah, you know, to me, these are these 1, 2, 3, 4, and even 19.5 probably are the, well, I've got a few others circled, I guess, but these are together happen to be the ones that I think are the most important and potentially would give us the greatest, you know, bang for our buck. And again, you know, with the caveat on the, you know, metro districts, and if we do a metro district policy, then certainly affordable housing needs to be a part of that. I think that makes sense. And on 19, I would just add, it doesn't have to be contingent on a dedicated revenue stream. You know, if affordable housing is a priority, we make it a priority. And we look in the budget how we can make it happen and to what extent we get to make it happen and when we can make it happen, I guess. You know, and so
I would agree with that, actually. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it just becomes a strategy for financing it based on even, you know, what land's available and whatever, what revenues could be identified, yada yada. There's a lot of flexibility there that we don't have to feel like we're constrained. So.
Thanks, Molly, for talking about kind of the expanded for number 4, because I do feel like it's kind of reactionary and not being proactive. So I think we can have some more, I don't know, kind of priorities in there or address it a little differently. So thank you for bringing that up. The only other thing I have a question or a comment on it for number 5, and I'm not going to use my words very well, but thinking about different ways to build housing and bring, I think there's different ways people are manufacturing housing with like building the sides and then bringing that in and prefab and kind of these different ideas that people have been doing. So, I mean, maybe adding that in there as well, that there are different ways to build houses, but we've done it the same way traditionally for decades, and that there are new innovations that we could be looking at.
Yeah, I like that. Thanks, Emily.
Yep, great point. And that's something we can add in, and that could be considered as well, just in looking for kind of what are barriers to those being utilized currently. Because I do think from a broad market perspective, I think we're really now just getting to the tipping point where some of the prefab housing is about to start becoming more and more mainstream. So I think it's really appropriate to be thinking about that and making sure that you as a city are welcoming that and are ready for that. And even to the extent that the city may want to think about how do we incentivize that from a just process standpoint, is typically an easy way to think about that as well. So absolutely looking for some of those partnerships is very, you're right on point in terms of, I think, where the market is likely to go in the next 5 years with that as well. So great points. So this is our last kind of group of strategies. We'll also talk on the next slide about some kind of the other ongoing efforts. So we'll acknowledge those, and then we'll come back to everything as a whole just in our last couple minutes. But so for this last group, we're focused here on greatest challenge number 7, which is that housing policies have not consistently addressed housing stability and healthy housing, especially for people who rent. So most of these are tailored or primarily focused on kind of the health and stability elements of the vision. You'll see that as we walk through. So here we're looking at 20 is looking at a mandated rental license or registry program. This really kind of lays the groundwork for being able to implement a lot of other kind of best practice rental regulations. And Ken, I thought of this one as well when you were mentioning before about discrimination in the housing market. This is also an avenue where you can help promote resident rights to renters so that they are aware of their fair housing rights and they do report bad actors. It's also a way to keep landlords educated with best practices, provide leases in a variety of language. So lots of things you can do with 20 if you implement kind of the infrastructure for it. 21, revisions to occupancy limits and family definitions. So looking at U+2. 22, public sector right of first refusal. So that really speaks to, I think, the partnership that Stefka was mentioning before. So as we think about affordable units that may be aging out and being sold on the market or to market rate, this is a strategy that would help kind of intervene in that process and say, oh, do we have a partner that wants to buy this? Or, oh, does the city want to buy this with land trust? So looking at that, just kind of intervening in a step to make sure that it adds an extra layer of kind of preservation protection on your existing affordable inventory. 23 is a tenant right of first refusal. So 22 and 23 are different in terms of who has the right to buy it and what triggers that, but it's also a first refusal. This really promotes kind of cooperative ownership, either of multifamily, so conversion into condos from multifamily by resident ownership or manufactured housing communities. 24, supporting community organizing in manufactured home communities and access to resident rights information specific to manufactured home communities. 25, already an ad hoc committee quick win. That's foreclosure and eviction prevention and legal representation, which is ongoing, but it's been CARES Act funded for now. And so we're recommending that continue on, even as we move past, hopefully, kind of CARES Act necessity. And then 26 would be small landlord incentives. So that's looking at incentives for rehab in exchange for making units subsidized for smaller landlords. So questions, comments, thoughts, reactions. This is our last group, and then we'll kind of take a step back and talk about anything that might be missing or anything that you are hoping to see that you haven't yet.
Yeah, I'll just say actually this section is the, I like 21. The rest of them, I'm not sure if and 25 is kind of a, to me, kind of a COVID issue. As I guess a small landlord is not referring to stature, I guess, or size, but what maybe number of houses you own. I think I'm a
good point.
I would, if as a boy, that'd be wonderful. I'd be happy to keep rent down if somebody took care of all of the cost of my improvements to keep a place up. So, that's a nice perk. The only problem with that, it might incentivize more people to buy investment properties if the city's going to, fund their rehab construction. So I'm not sure about that aspect of it. That's kind of a unique strategy that I've never seen before. you know, and the rest of those, I don't know, I won't ask for details now. I'd just be interested in how some of those actually, you know, work in practice, and maybe Lindsay could fill me in sometime on what some of those, you know, what some of those mean and would look like, and how those, you know, the practicality of some of those things. I mean, on somebody, you know, in terms of a first right of refusal, I don't know if that has to be, you know, mandated. If I had a house rented to somebody and they seemed to have the means and ability to buy the house and I wanted to sell it, I'd sell it to them in a heartbeat. Why not? You know, instead of hiring a realtor and going through that brain damage. I mean, that's like a no-brainer to me, but I mean, I don't know if it has to be, you know, mandated or not. I don't know what that looks like if you say they have to. I don't know. To me, I'm not sure if that would matter. I could, you know, if that has to be written into law, I guess we, you know, we could do it. I don't know if it would help or hurt or really make that much, you know, much difference. But, you know, is there, I guess, you know, I know there's the thing with, you know, landlord, you know, registry and that sort of thing. I wonder if there's a similar thing for renters. Because I've had some history with, you know, with renters that, you know, intentionally don't pay their rent, trash up the property, and are irresponsible. Maybe we should have a you know, a renter registry if we're going to have a landlord registry. Because if we're, you know, if we're humiliating landlords, maybe we need to realize people are occupying those homes, and sometimes there's a, you know, there's a reason people are evicted, you know, and it seems like most landlords that I know of, and from my own personal experience, you know, you like to, I actually remember a fellow legislator that I overheard on a conversation who owned, you know, numerous rental properties, telling somebody, look, that person is a good renter, do whatever it takes to keep him happy, you know. And so I think he was keeping the rent the same or even willing to lower it because he realized the person was paying their rent and paying it on time. And so most landlords probably would be happy to keep you know, rent the same and not increase it, you know, from that standpoint, or at least that's my experience. But anyway, just
to clarify on the rental license and registry, that's not removing any rights of the landlord in terms of how they manage their property or what they can do or what rents they can charge. It's not at all that. It's just creating a log of that property exists, just like your short-term rental registry, in terms of knowing that exists. And the reason that that's attached to the landlord instead of the renter is because the renter is much more likely to move out of your community and be transient. So we're focused here on the unit itself and not necessarily the occupant. So it's just to clarify, this can also be a resource for landlords to help give them additional supports that the city could help with. And yes, it is, you are acknowledging that you have a rental and you can charge a fee for that, but you don't even have to charge a fee for that registry, and it doesn't necessarily obligate the landlord to you know, any specific requirements necessarily. It's just creating that baseline so that you can provide resources to them, but then also, yes, there are lots of renter protections that you can include as part of that process. But just to clarify, in and of itself, it's not necessarily regulating the landlord, like what rents they can charge or who they can rent to or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah, Ross.
Yeah, thanks. So with caveats, I like all of these. The on the licensing side, this is a tool that's been used very successfully in many cities, and it's not just for kind of verifying, you know, that they're good landlords, but it's also helping to for example, if I wanted to rent a property right now, I can't find any good resources for standardized lease agreements. I have to go
Right.
talk to somebody, right? What's a good lease agreement that seems to work in Fort Collins, right? So I think it can also help landlords. And we talked about conflict resolution. Was it that a work session this week? Where did we talk about that recently? A different subcommittee that I'm a member on. They're all blurring together. Yeah. So, but it was Ken. It was the meeting that we had last week with ASCSU.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about kind of some of these issues.
Right. So, I mean, I think that's an issue worth exploring. And then on the occupancy limits, I think what we're talking about here is trying to find ways to right size them essentially and make them work for how Fort Collins has evolved, but not. I think getting rid of them would trigger a significant voter backlash. So this is one that has, I think, some yellow flags in it. Be careful, proceed with care kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't mean we shouldn't think about it, but it just means be aware. And then, so yeah, that's my thoughts.
Hey, just sorry, Emily, but since I wanted to kind of segue from Ross's thing, because one of the things that was referenced with our discussion with the ASCSU, reps was just the, so even if the occupancy isn't changed, because right now, I guess there's a waiver or whatever that could be secured, again, so if you have a 4-bedroom house, you could have at least 4 people in it opposed to 2 or 3 or whatever it is now. I guess it'd be 3, right? But looking at making that process easier to be facilitated and processed.
Right. Yeah. In those places where it could be allowed.
Right.
Find the process. Yeah, I think that's a possibly even a shorter term thing we could look at.
Yeah, I mean, that at least is a first step that could help, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to mention that as well. So I like this section. I think especially as we moved more towards renter-owned housing in Fort Collins, that we do need to really look at renter protections and supports. It's no surprise that I like the manufactured home supports and organizing. And I did have one question about, so in number 22, those are for affordable housing, like deed restricted. And I'm curious about programs. I don't know if it would be requiring it, but a program or a community conversation around tenant as well. So if I'm renting a house and it's going to go for sale, can I purchase it, and being able to facilitate that as well. So I think DC has a law that requires that, but I think just exploring that here, and even if it's just a assistance or something that we offer help with, would be my only addition to this list. But I like how it looks now, so thank you.
Great. Thanks. And I know we're out of time. I'll just give you a quick cursory overview. The next slide just talks about additional projects that are ongoing that we're just acknowledging these are happening, and these are already kind of recommendations that have been endorsed as part of these processes. And so we want to acknowledge them here as well, so that we're not kind of, oh, some strategies are here and some are there. So this acknowledges the land use code, the fair housing analysis, Homeward 2020, and then as well as the previous affordable housing strategic plan, which also has good elements that are being carried forward. And then just acknowledging, kind of continuing citywide efforts and interdepartmental efforts that kind of overlap with housing. And then the last slide just kind of summarizes the next slide, recaps the questions, we'll skip that, but this just summarizes all of the different ones that we've walked through, all 26. I put this back up in case, we wanted to talk about anything that you felt like you expected to see or were hoping to see that wasn't there. This kind of gives you the recap. I know we're out of time, so if you have thoughts on that, love to hear it, but also, again, happy to make time available for anyone that wants to do a deeper dive on any of these specifically. And obviously we'll want to continue to get your feedback as you have time to kind of sit with the plan a bit, look through the full release of the plan as well. So I will kind of hand back off. If anybody has any closing comments, happy to hear those, but happy to let you all get back to your evening as well. And sorry, Lindsay, I'd left you 0 time for any of the things you were going to cover. So apologies.
That's all right. I certainly welcome any final comments from the council members. And I am prepared to briefly summarize the feedback tonight and then transition us just to process and check in before we close. So maybe a quick summary. I have 12 different points that we covered tonight, and I'll try to just hit them at a really high level, but lots of really great feedback from you all. One of the things that we've always been really excited about with Molly is that we're so lucky that she can speak so quickly and so clearly at the same time. So thank you all for walking through those couple dozen strategies together. With the fair housing strategy to look at financial literacy, with ADUs, see what we can explore more quickly while continuing to watch cost. With visitability, a little bit more information on cost and where that comes in, while overall support. When we're thinking about refining the goals, thinking about bringing in population trends and looking at more than just income. Looking at how we can bring in an X Prize, the design competition, or more innovative partnerships into either existing language or a new strategy. The caveat regarding metro districts, so continuing to watch that process. Explore other options besides solely funding to expand the land bank activities. Different ways to build housing, mentioned of prefab, and we can continue to work that into the now refined strategy number 15. And then conflict resolution, bringing that in as well. And then with occupancy, clarifying that this is about right sizing and potentially moving forward with streamlining processes. So please let me know if I missed anything. I also was moving fairly quickly, and I'm going to advance us some slides to our process check-in. So we always take at least one moment to ask any feedback that you have on the pre-work, and then feedback that you have on the process overall, and any adjustments for not the December meeting, but then for the February meeting. Yep. And then I'll land us on this slide around where you all might like to go next, and let you all do both process feedback and focus for February, knowing that we had planned on doing a deep dive with you on the plan, knowing that your next meeting is 1 week before first reading of plan adoption.
Yeah, Russ?
So, I think we could spend all of February on the plan deep dive, and we might not need to add any other topics, just thinking about it. I think we're doing well, but and we've identified things to recommend to council, which is, our job. So I think we're moving along, but yeah, deep dive, and we'd like to get this in this council's hands to be able to potentially adopt it. So.
Yeah, I agree. Ken, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm fine with the focus, I guess, on the deep dive plan. Yeah, I mean, the list there, those bullet points, those would be an additional ones.
So in the past, we have selected topics that we want to talk about. So the ones that are italicized, we've discussed. So it looks like there's a few that we haven't gotten to yet. And if we want to add those to our next meeting.
Wow, you've discussed quite a few. That's great. Now, I would say, yeah, if we deep dive into the plan, that might be adequate, especially if it looks like you've almost discussed everything. That I would say is the greatest importance there anyway. So good work, committee, up to this point.
Great. Anything else, Lindsay? Okay, well, great. Well, thank you so much for our guests and hanging in there with us and everyone's feedback. And we will see you in February. And thank you, Molly.
Man, great presentation. So glad I was here for that.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Emily.
Good
Thanks.
night.
Yep. Good night.